This video is a beginner's guide to starting in Final Cut Pro in 2024. When you first open up Final Cut Pro, you will be greeted with a screen like this. This is just showing you all of the new features in the latest update. Go ahead and push continue. Now at first you'll see that you have this untitled library. This is the default library that ships with Final Cut Pro, but what I recommend you do instead is go up to File, select New, and then select Library. In here, you can rename this library, so we'll just call it First Project, and you'll see that you can choose where it saves to. By default, it's going to save it to your Movies folder, so if you ever need to relocate this project, you can go to your Movies folder on your computer and find it there. I'm going to go ahead and expand this out so we can find a better location, and I'm going to locate the folder that I want to save this to. From there, we can go ahead and push Save. So now we have created our first library. You'll also see that there's this additional untitled library. If you're like me and you want to declutter this left side, you can right click on that and then select Close Library Untitled, and that is now going to be gone. You can reopen it later if you so choose. You'll notice some things here on the far left side. First, we have Smart Collections, and then we also have what's known as an event. So firstly, we just created a library. Think of a library just like a library in real life, just a massive place that contains thousands and thousands of books. Those books are essentially all of your clips. But inside of a library, there's also shelves. Think of these shelves as your events. So this is where you would somewhat categorize your footage. For example, I might have a shelf that is a specific date, or we could even have a shelf that is scene 1. It's really up to you how you want to categorize this. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it as today's date, but from there you'll go to the right and you'll see this big import media button. If you don't have that import media button, you can just go on up to the top and click on this down arrow, which will allow you to import footage, or you can press Command I on your keyboard. Importing media, we can go ahead and locate the folder that we want to use. Now this is completely dependent on where you've placed footage on your computer. Now it should be noted that if you don't want to use this import window, you can go ahead and close out of that, and you can just use Finder to bring in your footage. So if you have a saved destination that's much easier for you to locate using Finder, you can go ahead and do that. Then just click and drag that folder over into your event. And now you'll notice that Final Cut Pro has brought in all of the different clips that I had inside of that folder. But even more importantly, if we go over to the left side, we can click on this arrow to expand this. And you'll notice I have a bunch of these different folders with this key icon. These are keyword collections, and those keyword collections were generated by the different folder names I created in Finder. So if I locate the folder that I just imported in Finder and open that up, you'll see that I have an images, a music, and a stock videos folder. Those keyword collections would show up here inside of Final Cut Pro. This is super handy for organizing your footage before you get to editing to make your editing life so much simpler. So for right now, I just want to take a look at the video footage. I don't want to see any of my music assets or my image assets. I've selected stock videos, and we can see we have these 3 clips here. How do we get these clips down onto our timeline? Well, to do that, we can come on down here and click on New Project. Clicking that will bring up this dialog window. We can call this whatever we want to call it. I'll just call it First Project, and we can select which event it places it in, which we will leave as 12/30/23. If you happen to know the exact settings you want for your video, you can come down here to the bottom left and select Use Custom Settings. In here, we can choose stuff like the resolution, we can choose the frame rate, and we can choose what kind of rendering it has, and we can even go as far to change the audio from stereo over to surround. Now, if you don't understand what these different settings do, this is what I would suggest you edit with. For your video, I would suggest at least using 1080p or 4K. For your frame rate, I would suggest using 2398 if you want a more cinematic feel to your videos, or if you want more of a live performance or maybe a tech channel, then I would suggest you select 2997. For this tutorial, we're just going to do 2997 and then push OK. Now that we've created our project, we can start to bring our footage down onto the timeline, and there are many different ways to do this. Firstly, you'll notice that as I skim over the footage with my mouse, it's actually playing back in the viewer on the right hand side. So this can be a great way to find the exact piece of footage that you want to bring down to your timeline. If we want to select a specific portion of this clip and not just bring the entire clip down onto the timeline, we can find that part of the clip we want and push I. This stands for the in point, so it is the in point of your edit. Moving further into the clip, we can find the out point, and then we'll just push O. You'll notice that that has created a golden selection within this clip, and that indicates the exact portion of video we will be bringing down. Now that I've done that, I have several options to get this clip down to the timeline. I can just click and drag, and this is usually my primary way for getting clips down on the timeline. But something you'll notice with Final Cut Pro is that if I bring this clip all the way to the far right hand side and release, it's not going to place that clip over here on the right side. It's going to magnetically attach it to the left hand side. This is what's known as the magnetic timeline, and I will get further into depth on this in just a little bit. But before we do that, I want to show you some other methods for getting clips down onto the timeline. I'll push I and I'll push O, and then we can come down here to the bottom left side of our browser, and you'll notice that we have these different icons here. The first one is to connect a clip. If we move my playhead forward just a little bit and I click on this icon, it places the clip above the clip that's inside of the magnetic timeline. I'll go ahead and undo that with Command Z, then we can go ahead and click on this second icon. By clicking on that, that will insert the clip into the timeline. So what it has done is it has created a cut, and then it has placed the rest of the footage on the right hand side of that clip that we just inserted. The third icon will append to the storyline. So by clicking on that, it's going to place the clip at the very end of your timeline. This is one of my most used shortcuts to very quickly get media down on the timeline, because I can just select a clip, E, and E. So now I have all those clips down on the timeline in just a matter of seconds. And finally, there's an icon to overwrite, and this does exactly what it says. So if I were to click on this icon, it would overwrite that media with whichever clip I have selected down on the magnetic timeline. Now, one quick thing to know is that you don't just have to bring video and audio down together on the timeline. You can click on this down arrow and you can change which mode you are in. So right now, all is selected, which means both video and audio from any given clip is going to come down to the timeline. If I wanted just video, I could go ahead and select video only, or if I just wanted the audio from a clip, I could select audio only. I'm going to go ahead and leave it as all for right now. So now that I have my clips down on the timeline, I might want to get a better view of these clips. You can push Command plus or Command minus to zoom on the timeline. If you have a trackpad, you can pinch to zoom and that will work just as well. Now, maybe these clips aren't quite big enough and I want to have a better view of them down on the timeline. We can come over to the right side and you'll see this little film reel icon with an arrow pointing down. In here, you can see we can adjust stuff like the zoom, but we can also adjust stuff like the clip height. So if you want to make your clips bigger or smaller, you can do that. Also, if your clips have any sort of audio attached, you can select if you want to show more of the audio or less of the audio. We'll get into that in just a little bit. Now that I have my clips at a scale that I can see properly, I can go ahead and start to edit these clips. The first and primary method of editing is simply by trimming. To do that, come to one of the edges of these clips and then just click and drag, and that will allow you to trim off that portion of video. So I can either trim to the right, or we can move my mouse to the left side and then start trimming the clip on the left. The next way you should know how to edit is to cut a clip, and this is done with the blade tool. You can get the blade tool by either coming over here to the arrow icon, clicking on the down arrow and then selecting blade, or what's much faster is just by pushing B on the keyboard. Now that we have the blade tool, I can click anywhere on one of these clips to make a cut. You'll notice that now that I've created that cut, it's created a dotted line. That dotted line indicates that from this clip to the next clip is a continuation. That means that they are from the exact same clip at the exact same time. And what's really great about these dotted lines is if I were to go back to my arrow tool by clicking here, pressing the select tool, or by pushing A, you'll see that I can select that edit point and I can just push delete. So if you want to clean up your timeline a bit, go ahead and just delete those edit points that you are no longer using. I make accidental cuts all the time, so this is super handy to know. So now that I've created a cut in this clip, I can go ahead and select this part of the clip that I no longer want, and I'll go ahead and just push delete or backspace depending on what your keyboard says. So you can quickly go through your video and just find the exact portions of video that you want by clicking and dragging on all of the edges, or by pushing B to get the blade tool and creating a cut, then selecting that part and pushing backspace to delete. And this is the primary way you're going to be editing inside of Final Cut Pro. So now that we've covered the basics of trimming and making cuts inside of Final Cut Pro, I want to start to break down the magnetic timeline. Now I have a very in-depth that covers this in a way that beginners can really understand and grasp. I'm going to link that at the very end of this video, which I think you should go and watch next. But the very basics of the magnetic timeline are that if I had a clip clicked and dragged above another clip, you'll notice that there's this blue stem attached. That blue stem is the connection point between this clip and this clip. What that means is if I were to take this clip and drag it to the left-hand side, you'll notice that the attached clip goes with it. Now this is true not just of clips on top, but also audio elements down on the bottom. They are attached. So again, if I click and drag that, both the audio and the video are going to move with it. However, you may frequently run into an issue where you don't want the clips above or below to be attached to whatever you are moving on the timeline. To fix this, you can push Command and Option holding them together, then click anywhere you want on the clip that is above the timeline or on the audio that is below the timeline, and you'll notice now that that stem has moved to that new position, meaning that it is no longer attached to this clip, but it is attached to this secondary clip. There's a third powerful tool that I would love to show, but it's going to take a little bit too much time for this video, so I strongly suggest you check out my in-depth magnetic timeline video once you are done watching this one. So now that I've added some clips down on the timeline, I want to start to cover some of the effects you can use inside of Final Cut Pro. To get to your effects panel, you'll need to go to the far right side and click on this icon. My effects are going to look significantly different from yours because I have some plugins installed, but there are hundreds of effects you should check out inside of Final Cut Pro that are installed by default. The most common effect you're likely going to use is the color board, and you'll notice that it's here at the very top left-hand side of your effects. To apply an effect, click and drag that effect onto whichever clip you want to apply it to. You'll notice that that clip turns gray, noting that I'm going to apply it to that clip. Another great way to apply an effect is to select a clip, then double click on whichever effect you want to apply, and that will automatically apply it. Now that I've applied this effect, you'll notice here on the right side inside of what's known as my video inspector, we can see that the color board has been applied underneath the effects part of this panel. If you don't see this, make sure that you're inside of your video inspector by clicking on this video reel right here. With the color board, if I wanted to edit it, I would just need to go over to this super colorful icon right here. Clicking on that will show you the color board. The color board might seem a little bit confusing at first, but it's actually really quite simple. If you want to adjust what's known as the global color, so all of the colors at once, your shadows, your midtones, and your highlights, you can adjust that with this little handle right here. If I wanted to make it so everything looked green, all I would need to do is click and drag this into the green zone. However, you'll also notice here there is this gray line, and anything underneath that gray line is going to be the exact opposite of the color spectrum. If I needed to bring in some more magenta to my shot, all I would need to do is click and drag this down directly, and you'll notice that everything shifts to magenta. This is extremely helpful when you need to quickly balance a shot, because you can say, okay, I need the opposite of that green color that I'm getting right now. I'll just click and drag that down, and now everything is over in the magenta zone. If you need to adjust your shadows, your midtones, or your highlights, you can do all of those individually. So if I wanted the darker parts of this image to be more in the teal zone, I could go ahead and drag that up. Then maybe I want my midtones to have more of a warm look to them. Click and drag that down, which will bring me the opposite in that color spectrum, giving me the classic teal and orange look that you see very commonly in Hollywood films. If you want to adjust the saturation on everything, we can go to the saturation panel. In here we have our global handle here on the far left, so if we wanted to make it black and white, we could just click and drag that down. Now we have a black and white image. But maybe we want to just adjust the saturation in these darker parts of the image. I'll go ahead and just click and drag down on my shadows, so now only the black parts of the image are black and white, but everything else still has that color. It should also be noted that if you want exact values, you can find those values down here at the bottom, and so we could just type in something like 20%, and that will adjust it to whatever exact value you put in. Finally, there is the exposure tab. If we wanted to make it so the dark areas of our image are darker, we can go ahead and just drag that down. Or if we wanted the lighter parts of our image to be darker or brighter, we can adjust that accordingly. One last thing I want to cover with the color board section is that if you wanted to add, say, a creative look to maybe darken part of your image or brighten just a specific part, this is where color masks come into play. To get there, let's go ahead and add in another color board. Then here at the top right, you'll notice there's this little mask icon. Clicking on that, we can select to add a shape mask or a color mask. A shape mask is of course just going to be a specific shape, but a color mask allows you to affect just a singular color in your image. So if I wanted to only affect the blue areas or the white areas, it's really up to you. Let's go ahead and do a shape mask. I can click and drag this wherever I want in the image, and maybe I want the inside of this shape mask to be much darker. So we'll go to our exposure and drop down the darkness. So now you can see that darkness in my image is moving around. We can go ahead and expand it out by clicking on this little handle here. If we want to stretch it out in one axis, we can do that with these green handles. We can rotate it with this handle here, and we can feather it with this outermost handle. Once you're done, you can go ahead and push done there. And if you ever need to get back to that, you can click on this icon here. And again, we can move our mask around. Once I'm done with all of my color inspector, I can go back into my video inspector and see all of the changes I've made. If I ever want to re-enable or disable a specific effect, I can click on this check mark icon right here, and that will remove those changes. Or if I want to remove all of the effects at the same time, we can click on this check mark next to effects. That will remove all of the effects at once. And finally, if you ever need to delete an effect, you can select it and just push delete. Or if you need to adjust the order that the effects are in, you can just click and drag it and it will work perfectly. So that is the color board, but there are a ton of other effects found inside of Final Cut Pro. For example, I'll go ahead and just look up the bad TV effect and click and drag to apply that onto my clip. You'll notice that it's giving me this nice little CRT look to this clip. I can adjust the amount by using this slider here. I can adjust the static type on this particular effect, change it to pink noise, and we can even adjust stuff like the roll. It should also be noted that most effects can be animated with keyframes. For example, if I wanted the amount to start off at 0, we could drag that down to 0, and then we could go over to this diamond icon. Clicking on that, you'll notice that it adds a keyframe. If I move forward in my video and then drag up this slider, it will automatically add in another keyframe. So if I go before the animation and push play, you can see that it animates on just like that. I'm gonna go ahead and delete the bad TV effect, and we should jump on over into the transform panel because you're going to be using this a lot. If you can't see the controls for your transform, you can go over here to the right side and then click on show. And that's true of a lot of the different panels inside of Final Cut Pro. In here, you'll see stuff like the position, which we can adjust the X and Y values of, the rotation, which we can adjust just the Z value of, and the scale. And if you want to scale in just a singular direction, you have your scale X and Y right here. Another really great way to adjust your transform is by using the transform tool directly on the screen. I'll go ahead and click on that, and you can also achieve that with Shift T. From here, you'll see that I have these different controls on all of the sides. So if I wanted to scale it up, I'll just click in the corner. If I wanted to move it so the sun is closer to the center, we could just click and drag, and now that sun is closer to the center of our image. And if I wanted to rotate it, I could just click on this handle and rotate it just like so. You'll also see that there's this handy little icon in the top right. This allows me to see the image outside of the viewable zone, so I can very easily see if there's something that I'm cutting off that I want to keep inside of my video. This takes a bit more computing power, so if your computer is running slow, go ahead and disable that, and you should get back a little bit of the speed. Now with the transform panel, you can go inside of here and add a keyframe for each of these parameters. So for example, if I wanted to scale up my video over time, I could click to add a keyframe, move forward in time, then bring the scale way up, and you'll notice that over the duration of that particular portion, it's going to slowly animate. But maybe I'm not happy with a particular keyframe. There are two different ways to deal with this. One is to go over here to the right side to this panel and click on one of these arrows to get to the keyframe you want to get to. So I'll click there, and you'll notice that we can now see that there is a keyframe at this specific point. I could delete that keyframe just by clicking on that again, and it will remove that keyframe. But a much easier and more visual way to work with keyframes is to actually go down to your clip. Right click on your clip, then select Show Video Animation, which can also be achieved with Control V. Selecting that brings up this nice little panel in here, and we can see the different keyframes that we've applied to our video. I can move these keyframes by clicking and dragging directly on them. So if I needed to slow down an animation, I could drag these farther apart. If I wanted to delete a keyframe, I can push delete. Once we're done with the transform panel, we can go up to the top right hand corner and push done. Now let's say that I had a specific effect that I wanted to apply on top of all of my clips at the same time, and I don't want to apply it individually. Say for example, I have this bad TV effect and I want every single clip here to get that effect. Go ahead and select your clip, then push Command C, or you can go up to edit and go down to copy. From there, select the other clips that you want to receive the effects. I'll just click and drag to create a box and select both of those clips. After that, we can go on up to edit and then we can select paste attributes, which can also be achieved with Command Shift V. Once we've done that, it will bring up this little dialog window, and in here we can select which effects we want to copy over onto the other clips. In this instance, I only want the bad TV effect to appear. So I'll go ahead and disable the transform tools and we'll disable color board 1. So now we are just left with bad TV. From there, we'll go ahead and push paste, and now these two other clips also have that bad TV effect. So now that I've applied my effects and color corrections, it's time to add in some nice titles. To add a title, go on up over here to the top left-hand corner and you'll see your titles and generators. Clicking on that, you'll see that you have a titles and a generators panel. If you want to see more categories in either of these, you can click on this arrow to expand it. Again, this is going to look quite a bit different because I have a lot of plugins installed, but you should see a lot of the basics here when you expand this. I'm going to go ahead and just look up the basic title, which is the default title. Click and drag this like any other clip down onto the timeline, and you'll notice it gives us this purple clip. This purple clip can be treated just like any other clip. We can expand it by clicking and dragging on the right side or left side, move it around on our timeline, and you'll notice it has that connection point just like any other clip. With this title, we don't always need the transform tool to move it. We can actually click and drag on a lot of titles and move them directly in the window without ever selecting the transform tool. Also notice it has these nice alignment tools. So if I needed to align it to the center of the screen, I just move it there and it has those two alignments. If I wanted to edit this title, I could either double click on it, or we can go up here to the top right hand corner and find the title inspector. In here, you'll see your title, and we can go ahead and just write in whatever we want. So I'll write in subscribe. We could go in and change what kind of font we have. Maybe I want it to have this impact text so it's huge. We could bring up the scale of that. We can change the alignment on it and adjust stuff like the tracking. So there's really a ton of controls that I don't want to quite get into right now, but the one that's really important is to know about your face controls. If you ever wanted to change the color of your text, you can click on show to show your face, and then we can change this over to whichever color we like. Now that I have this title, I want to go ahead and add in a nice fade to it. That is where the transitions come in inside of Final Cut Pro. To get to your transitions, go over to the far right side and you'll see your transitions icon right here. It kind of looks like a sideways hourglass. Again, my transitions are going to look different because I have a lot of different plugins, but the one I know you're for sure going to have is this cross dissolve transition, and this one's the most common. To apply transition is super easy. You can just click and drag directly onto whichever connection point you want to have the transition, or let's say I want to have the entire clip have a transition. I'll just click and drag it directly on the middle, and you'll see that now it has added a cross dissolve transition onto this text. So if I want to push play, it has a nice little fade. I'm going to go ahead and apply a fade transition to the middle of these two clips. I'll select the connection point, and I can actually just push Command T, which will apply your default transition. I'll go ahead and zoom in with Command plus, and you'll see that I have some handles here to work with this transition. This middle icon allows me to click and drag, which will allow me to trim one clip while extending out the other clip at the same time. This is super handy. If I wanted to extend out just a singular clip, say this left-hand clip, I could go ahead and go to the top right, and you can see I can expand that out while keeping this other clip at the exact same duration. If I wanted to make this transition longer or shorter, all I need to do is click and drag on the side of it, and that will allow me to expand it or to shorten it. With transitions, a lot of the time you have additional controls up here in the top right hand corner. So with the fade transition, for example, we can adjust the look of it and the easing. So if you want to get more creative with your videos, make sure you check out those transition options, and that will give you a little bit more flexibility. And one of the last things that I want to cover before exporting this video is how to work with audio inside of Final Cut Pro. Go back to your browser by going to the very top left-hand corner and clicking on this slate icon. I want to just take a look at my audio elements, so I'm going to go ahead and use this keyword collection for my music. I can go ahead and make an exact selection of what part of that audio I want by pushing I and O. Then I can click and drag it down onto the timeline. Now with audio inside of Final Cut Pro, it's always going to appear on the bottom side of the magnetic timeline. If you're like me and you like to color code your editing so you can very quickly find what you're working with, there is this handy tool called rolls. So I'm going to right click on this audio clip, then go to assign audio rolls, and I'm going to assign it as music. So now it is that nice green color. With audio, you have a whole bunch of different options inside of Final Cut Pro to work with it. You can adjust the volume by going to the top right hand corner and you'll see the volume slider. I can go ahead and click and drag that, and you'll see that in real time it's adjusting these audio waveforms. As it gets closer to red, that means it's going to be peaking the audio, so just make sure that you're not in that red zone with your audio elements. I'm going to go ahead and drag this down so that I can see a little bit more of my different audio effects, and in here you'll see stuff like equalization. This is an important step with working with audio. I don't have time to cover all of the tips I have, but you can find that here, and you can click on this icon to see your equalizer just like so. Underneath that is the voice isolation. This is incredibly powerful if you have really bad dialogue that needs cleaning up. You can just check this box and drag up the amount to a point that you are happy with. Moving further down is the audio analysis. So if you want even more control over your audio and you need to apply some effects such as adjusting the loudness of a clip, you can find audio analysis, then press show. In here you'll see stuff like the loudness. So if I click on that, I can add that. And this is handy if you happen to have some audio elements that are just not getting loud enough inside of your video. There's also noise removal. This is similar to the voice isolation tool, but it's more of a broad sense of noise removal. And finally, at the bottom is hum removal. Another really powerful thing with audio is adding in keyframes to adjust how loud it is or how quiet it is in your video. One way to do that is to go up to the very top right hand corner and again clicking on that keyframe diamond icon. But another way that's super handy is to do it directly on your audio element. I'll go ahead and zoom in with Command+. There's this kind of gray bar in the middle of my audio element. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and expand out this audio element so I can see it a little bit better. To do that, let's go to our video reel here, and we can click on this icon to show more of our audio elements. I could even expand out the height just a little bit like that. So we have this bar which we can click and drag to adjust the audio elements directly on the clip. If we wanted the audio to get quiet in a specific part of our video, we can push Option, and you'll notice that that has a little plus sign next to my mouse. If I click, that will add in a keyframe. So we could go ahead and click to add another keyframe and then just drag down part of the audio. And just like that, we've created a nice little easing to our audio to bring the volume down just a little bit. If we wanted to bring it back up, again, we could push Option, and then drag that up. So this could be super powerful for doing some audio ducking. But if you are like me, you're probably a little bit lazy and you don't want to click 4 times every single time you want to do a little bit of audio ducking. There is a much better way, and I absolutely love this feature inside of Final Cut Pro. Rather than individual keyframes, go on over to your arrow tool, click on this down arrow, and then find the range selection. That will give us the range selection tool. The range selection tool is really cool because I can select a specific portion of video, just like so, and I can either delete it by pushing backspace, or if we wanted to drop the volume on this one part, we can just click and drag on this bar, and you'll notice that it automatically adds in all of the keyframes I need to do a little bit of audio ducking. And finally, the very last thing I want to show you with audio, if you need to ever fade it in, you don't need to add a cross dissolve transition. You can actually fade in any audio element by finding this tiny little dot icon. Go ahead and click on that and drag it over, and you'll notice that it gives you a nice fade handle. You can even change what that handle type is by right clicking on it and changing the curve here. I'll go ahead and just leave it at the +3 dB, which is the default. Now that I've done all of my editing, I've edited all of my audio, it looks beautiful. It is time to send this off to YouTube. To do that, you'll need to go to the very top right hand corner and you'll find your share menu. Go ahead and click on that and you'll see you have a whole bunch of different options. The default is to do export file. So let's go ahead and select that. It's going to bring up this dialog window. In here, we can adjust what the name of this project is if we wanted to. We could add a description and the creator, all sorts of things, and it will automatically add tags based on whatever keywords we had inside of our project. You can also quickly skim through to make sure your project is looking good right here. Then from there, we can go over to the settings panel. Now, by default, it's going to want to use Apple ProRes 422. This is one of the best quality codecs out there. However, it is absolutely massive, and so I strongly recommend you try out a different codec. Right now you can see that this really short video is going to be 884 megabytes. However, if we were to change the source over to something like H.264, you'll notice that that drops down to 129 megabytes. One of the best codecs that I love to do is to actually go to this format option and change it from video and audio over to something like Apple devices, computer, or social platform. The one I use the most is computer. I also just leave it on single pass or faster, and then we can change our resolution to whatever we like. We'll leave it at 1920 by 1080. Then we can push next, and in here we can select where we want to export this to. I'll just jump to my exports folder, saved as first project, and I can push save. You can see how fast it's exporting by going to the top left-hand corner, and you can see your sharing percentage here. Because this video is really short and there's really not a lot to it, it's going to export very, very quickly, and when it's done, it will automatically open up your video for you. It is ready to go up on YouTube, and everybody is hopefully going to like and subscribe. If this video was helpful to you, consider pressing that like button, consider subscribing, and you may want to check out this video where I do a deep dive into the magnetic timeline from the perspective of somebody who may be a beginner and doesn't quite know how to use it. With that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I cannot wait to see you in the next one.